hall of people in Beijing, China's Communist Party is meeting to approve its new leadership. The week-long party congress will end with a transition of power to Vice President Xi Jinping. But beneath those staged, managed smiles lies the tempestuous realities of governing an emerging world power. It also comes as the Chinese people are beginning to discover their voice and increasingly calling for reform of the party's ironclad grip on power. Joining me now in the studio is Guo Bai, a former advisor at the French Embassy in China, Adam Legay, a journalist and specialist in Sino-African relations, Emmanuel Lincott, the editor-in-chief of Le Monde Chinois, and from Washington, D.C., the Financial Times' Richard McGregor, formerly the paper's Beijing correspondent and author of The Party, The Secret World of China's Communist Rulers. But first, here with us at the moment is our media correspondent, Florence Villeminot, who's been scanning the internet just to try and gauge whether she can get past the Great Firewall of China and see what people there are thinking about the Congress. And what have you managed to find?
Well, Annette, I think it's interesting to note, first of all, that the term 18th Congress has been censored on Weibo, which is often referred to as the Chinese Twitter. It actually has twice as many users as Twitter. Now, Chinese users are getting around this by using characters that are similar to Congress, but it seems like a game of cat and mouse with authorities there. Often postings are put up and taken off very quickly. Other websites have made screen grabs of these controversial postings, though, and so we're going to take a look at a couple of them right now. One trend that seems to be appearing right now is a lot of Weibo users are reacting to these bizarre restrictions and security measures that have been put in place in Beijing ahead of this Congress. For instance, Beijing residents can no longer buy kitchen knives, nor can they buy remote-controlled planes without registering them. For instance, here's a photo that I found on Weibo in a shop, and this sign says, anyone who buys mini aircraft must first register their real name in our store.
That's toy helicopters.
Toy helicopters,
yes. As opposed to buying real planes.
Exactly, toy helicopters.
I know China's become very wealthy, but I don't think we've got to that point yet.
One day, maybe. Here's another picture where you see a knife, shelves where there were knives that are empty. Now, another bizarre thing is that taxi drivers have been forced to take off the passenger side window handles. Now, the idea here is that perhaps people would throw leaflets outside the windows, propaganda, they say. So here are photos. Here's a photo here that was taken inside a taxi. So you can see there that the handle in the top picture has been taken off, and in the bottom, a veil has been put on the electric handle there, button. Now, another thing that's trending on Weibo right now is actually the U.S. election. It's been getting a lot of attention. Now, for instance, yesterday there were 250 million messages, postings about the U.S. election. Now, a lot of commentators say that it seems that though there's this leadership change going on in China, it seems like Chinese internet users are actually glued to what was going on in the U.S. because it's what they long for. One commentator actually referred to it as political porn for Chinese internet users. Now, let's take a look at some postings that were put on Weibo. This one I think is quite interesting, where it compares what went on in the U.S. to what's going on in China. For instance, here this posting says, in the U.S. election, you only find out that Obama won at the last minute. Mitt Romney called to congratulate him. In the Chinese election, you know 1 year in advance who won, who lost, and the loser's family is in jail. So this refers to Bo Xilai, who was once upon a time a favorite of the party, had a spectacular fall from grace. Here's another post I found, which actually, no, this is not the post. This is the message, the error message that comes up now. The post originally said, so when will we in our great mother country be able to elect our leaders? So as I said, it seems like there's this game of cat and mouse between internet users and internet authorities. What you do see a lot of, though, are these more official kind of websites, more, I guess, official propaganda websites. This one, for instance, is called Chine Information, it's in French. And here you see a bunch of photos of journalists that are, oops, that's not what I meant to do, journalists that are covering the event. For instance, this is a journalist on Tiananmen Square wearing red, all very symbolic, all very official images that you can find online.
Lawrence, thank you so much for that. And at that point, I just want to ask Richard McGregor in Washington, D.C. a question. And obviously what we're seeing there with those young people using the internet, Richard, I mean, while the rest of the world is labouring under enormous debt, China, of course, economically has been booming, albeit though we've seen a plateau recently. But when you're busy transforming the working class into the middle class, there comes a point where people want more than just flat screen TVs and trips to Singapore, don't they? I mean, they want to have the other things that come along with being part of a middle class as such as freedom of speech and expression.
Well, that's the theory, and I hope that's right. But we have to remember that you know China is in the early stages of development and political reform, and thus far, the big winners of the post-Tiananmen sort of economic takeoff have been the urban middle classes in the cities. And you turn that on its head, they're the people with most to lose if you turn the country's political system upside down in a very short amount of time. So urban middle class people, who have some kind of fear of being flooded by the peasants from the countryside and have their own hard-won property rights and the kind of wealth you talk about, trips to Singapore, flat-screen TVs. They want to protect that. Now, for the moment, I think they're on the side of the Communist Party. But you're right, there comes a time when they'll have other priorities. They don't necessarily want a government that they can vote in or out, but they want transparency, they want efficiency in government. They want a government that doesn't rip them off. They want a government that is not corrupt and does not give the privileged people, as it does now, an inside track. So there's a whole host of issues there that the government needs to manage, and I think the government and the party know this and try and manage that. The trouble is that the system has its own inbuilt flaws, which breed corruption. Which means in many respects some of the problems long-term are insoluble, particularly when the economic growth not only plateaus as it is now, but actually starts to fall off. And that's happening now in big cities like Shanghai.
And that's what I want to talk about with you guys, the gap between those who have and those who don't. And clearly if the economy is plateauing and things continue to worsen, that gap will increase. And how do you think that will play out as a result?
Well, I actually don't believe so, because Chinese economy is slowing down a little bit, but we need to pay attention to the rate of this slowing down. If it is like a free fall, then we have great problems, and it's going to be the common people who make salaries that suffers the most. But if China just slows down its growth rates, to a more reasonable range and allow the economic structure to change that actually to a direction that is more favorable to the household, then we can actually see a transition of the economy to be more equal, in fact. Because what happens in the past 10 years is like Chinese economy is becoming more and more capital intensive. So you have the higher and higher returns to the enterprises owners. Well, because of the large supply of the labor, the salary of especially for the unskilled workers, has been, flattened out for like at least 10 years from 94 to 2008, something like this. But these years we can see that actually these people has been seeing a very sharp raise of their salaries. And the economy has been encouraging more and more the development of services, especially high-end services. And if the economy can become, even if it grows a little bit slower, but become more and more service-oriented, that is to say, to be more labor-intensive, then we can actually expect the income gap to be a little bit narrowed instead of, again, enlarged.
Emmanuel Linko, do you agree?
I do agree in a certain way, but I do think that the main problem of China is not only a problem of money. It's also a problem for common people to have justice, to express their feelings freely. There is such a big contrast when you see these images of the Politburo and the elections in America with Barack Obama, who looks like a dancer, really. It's so different. It's a different style. It's a different society. And we have really the feeling that the Communist Party belongs not only to another world, but it belongs to another period.
It certainly seems to come across as belonging to another century. But Anima, talking about what you were saying earlier about how there's a need for reform within the party before you start, proceeding with other more ambitious plans. Surely it didn't help the Beaujolais scandal. I mean, that did a lot of damage to the party's image, didn't it?
Of course, that's a reality. That's a serious problem because you have two worlds cohabitating in China. You have the members of the Communist Party, the Politburo in particular, having all the advantages, the likes of Bo Xilai running Chongqing, 38 million inhabitants in that city alone. These are the princelings, those who are taking advantage of the resources of the country. It is somehow not a political party, but it's like somehow an empire, a kingdom that is being run by the communists. But the problem is that the Chinese will have to deal with the rest of the world, because the more they progress, the more they need to interact. In their ambition to become a leading nation running the world, they need to interact with the outside world. And it is becoming more and more problem. People are questioning, for instance, China's overwhelming export advantage to using cheap labor. This is becoming problematic. They are moving to the West in order to maintain that. It's one problem. Secondly, America has pivoted to this Asia in order to ensure that it has built friendship with India and other countries in order to contain China. And last but not the least, in places like Africa, where the Chinese are coming in order to get the resources, people are questioning somehow how China is dealing in order to ultimately not to encourage corruption, bad leadership, bad governance, and how it will risk to create the business model, the Beijing model, against what is the passionate thing that the West want, that is the American model.
Richard McGregor in Washington, D.C., given what Adama was just saying, the Communist Party leadership seems to be a rather opaque institution, doesn't it? And certainly, do you feel that within this new leadership that there will be a desire to open it up as such?
Well, it's incredibly opaque. It's just remarkable to me that the putative leader Xi Jinping could disappear for a week or two this year and have no commentary on where he was, and the system either was not able to or refused to tell anybody what had happened and where he'd gone to. We're about to see, as far as I can tell, that the new leadership to be unveiled in the same way that it has been in the past. Where the 9 or 7 members of the Politburo Standing Committee literally walk on stage in order of their seniority. And that's basically when we find out. We don't know anything really concrete, lots of speculation, but anything really concrete about, what deals were done for people to get various different positions, what trade-offs, what were the payoffs. Now, democracies have manifold faults, but usually they're out there in the open to see. And it's just medieval that this system continues like this. And there's no sign of the party really opening up to outside scrutiny or opening its processes up to outside scrutiny. The Bo Xilai case may have put them back in their box, but to me that is really just profoundly disappointing.
Gua, we were just talking there about the Beaujolais case and scandal as such, but the other story that's broken in recent weeks was a New York Times report which revealed the apparent wealth of the departing Prime Minister's family, several $1 billion, I think, from memory, in accumulated wealth. He was very quick to rebut that story, but again it shows the divisions between those who do have and those who don't.
Well, that's definitely true, and I agree with Richard that the party has to be more transparent. I mean, with the scandal of Prime Minister Wen, we don't know the whole story, but if actually they can open up more, like say they can make their assets more transparent, people can understand.
I do understand he's asked for the party to hold its own inquiry into this story, but having his own party hold an inquiry, I mean, it's not an independent judicial inquiry as such, is it?
But he can't just make this decision by himself, right? Because it's always a collective decision-making process inside the party. Well, as Richard rightly mentioned, like we really don't know exactly how it functions, but I guess they will have to reach a consensus that's to allow all the people to expose their possessions at the same time, not just Mr. Wen by himself. I think that is how it works. As mentioned, there needs to be a consensus. It makes the party more strong.
Emmanuel?
Yes, but I'm afraid that the time for change is coming, and we are not in a configuration of consensus, but maybe in a configuration of dissensus. What does it mean? It means that the main challenge for the new communist leaders will be to restore their image of integrity. This is the main point for the opinion in China.
Yeah, I really agree with that, especially with the selection of their bureaucrats. I think the process has to be made more transparent and also has to really always stay meritocratic instead of any kind of personal relations.
Even in some areas of the world, like Africa, there is a strong fear concerning the Chinese. Who are the Chinese? What are the goals? I think the new leaders need to restore the confidence also towards China.
Absolutely, I do agree. The problem is that they need to get out of their the bubble in which they are. Because you see in 2006, November, when they organized the China-Africa Summit, and they made these big announcements, celebratory mode, we're going to give $5–10 billion to Africa. People realize that, okay, they are doing it for their export credit for their own development. And people are questioning what is behind this. So on the ground, in the countries like in Zambia elsewhere, in the Shambisi mine, copper mine, people were reacting negatively. So when President Hu Jintao visited Africa, people rebutted his presence. So the Chinese more and more will have to face these problems. The big problem they encounter, however, is that the Chinese officials in the embassies and other places, they only want to deal with people who are eager to toe the line of the Chinese official. And that is not going to continue, because in Africa we have a tradition of democracy, of open speech, and we want to engage China, but we don't want to do it on China's own terms. And the Chinese, they want people to deal with them on the basis that you don't criticize us because culturally it's not acceptable. You don't have to challenge the way we do things here because we are a different country. They even invoke their history saying that between 1845 to 1945, it was a century of humiliation. The West dominated us. We don't want that anymore. And I think that they need to take into account the yearnings of countries like those of Africa that want really a different world in which their own advantage is taken care of, not a country that comes with the financial resources and believe it can dictate what it wants to do in Africa. I think that would be problematic for China in Africa.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I have a feeling that this conversation is going to continue in the corridor outside the studio. So, but at this point, I'd like to thank my guests, Guo Bai, Adam Agay, Emmanuel Linko, and Richard McGregor. And that's it for this edition of The Debate. Do stay with us here on France 24.